You stay here. Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm Sam Geltz.
And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people committed to a life rooted in science and unfettered by supernatural beliefs.
Today's show lands on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of 20th century's greatest American leader, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., so it seems important to keep his memory alive.
But before we begin, we want to tell viewers about our show's sponsors. The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. The next meetup is next Tuesday. It's 5:30 p.m. at a relatively new location, the Black Horse Pub and Brewery, 4429 Kingston Pike in the Western Plaza Shopping Center. For details, go to knoxvilleatheists.org. When you get to the meetup, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table, and as Matt Dillahunty at Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, or conversation, but if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. See our website, rationalist.org, for details. The first, third, and third Sunday mornings of each month are usually lectures with lively round-table discussions. The second Sunday, we hold a Skeptics Book Club. On the fourth Sunday, we mix it up. Some people, sometimes with potluck, get together in a member's house that we call a Reflections meeting.
Later in the show, we'll give you details to our website to visit for things like time and location. So can we get the In the News slide up? And so we're just coming off of the
Easter weekend.
Easter, Passover, April Fool's weekend.
Yeah, how convenient.
And Sam, what was happening?
Well, I was noting about how they dumped all of the religious movies off at once because they are guaranteed an audience. Like, these movies are always guaranteed an audience because churches get together and they just
go en masse?
Yeah, go en masse. So they're guaranteed to make some of their money back, usually. And they are basically just propaganda films. So
what were the names of these films? I wasn't paying attention.
Well, a couple that came out this last weekend is God's Not Dead 3. They're up to 3 on that. Kevin Sorbo plays in that, which I think is ironic because I remember him back when he played Hercules. And it was actually seeing that TV show of Kevin Sorbo playing Hercules that made me more interested in mythology, and my interest in mythology helped me get into atheism at a young age. So thank you, Kevin Sorbo.
All right. So God's Not Dead 3.
And Paul the Apostle was another one. I actually had a friend that went to see that with his group of church-going friends. He's an atheist, like I am, but he went with some church friends just to try to give it a chance and see the movie. And he said it was pretty horribly boring. And most of these movies are just kind of like, I've heard some reviewers say that it's not that you're picking on Christianity by calling them bad. They're just bad movies, and they don't try to be good because they have a built-in audience. So they don't need to be good because people are going to see them anyways. So they don't really try. And I find it rather disgusting when you really look at the plot points. Like in the first God's Not Dead movie, the entire plot of it is at the end of the movie, Kevin Sorbo is a God-hating atheist teacher who forces his beliefs on his students, and in the last scene of the movie, he gets hit and killed by a car, and right before he dies, the preacher runs up and he has a deathbed conversion right there in the end.
Oh my.
Yeah. So they're pretty disgusting when you really get down to it.
All right, so you've mentioned 2 of them. I think you said there was another third. So there's God Not Dead 3, Paul the Apostle.
I Can Only Imagine.
Yeah, I think I Can Only Imagine was another one. I don't really know the plot on that one, but there was a Samson movie that came out not too long ago. They usually trickle them out through the year, but this was a dump.
Imagine. All righty. Well, we've also got our a reporter from Central Illinois is on the line with us today. Charles, are you still there?
Yes.
All right, and maybe we can get Charles's picture with us. And Charles, have you heard any of these movies as well?
I've heard of them.
You didn't?
I do know that Samson bombed.
Yeah.
Samson. So is that a fourth one?
Oh, that was earlier in the year that came out. A couple months
Yeah.
ago.
Okay.
And God's Not Dead 3 is interesting because Kevin Sorbo died apparently in the first one,
Yeah.
that conversion, and all of a sudden he's walking all around the third one. So,
Well, I'm sure he plays a different character. I don't know anything about the third one yet.
You don't think, either of you, that they resurrected him, huh?
No. I mean, maybe he turned to God. Yeah.
They went into some really, really good makeup. Everybody's going to see the guy from the first one who died is now walking around again. It's kind of like the soap operas.
Well, he actually, this isn't even his first movie, that wasn't even the first movie where he died as an atheist. He usually plays this, like, atheist straw man. That's his role. They set up an atheist straw man in these movies.
All right.
And there's another movie where he plays, like, a Richard Dawkins character. I forget the name of this one, where he dies, and he goes to heaven when he dies, and he sees his, like, dead son. And another straw man they always put forward, I usually get this when we get callers asking us why we're atheists. The reason that the atheists are atheists in all these movies is because they're mad at God.
Oh.
And, like...
All right, so...
So he plays in another movie where he has a deathbed conversion and then comes back to life because he dies and sees his dead son.
All these plots are based around a lot of the straw man arguments and points that have been refuted 1,000 times.
But it gets their audiences pumped up still.
Yeah. And has a very nice video series started about these points refuted 1,000 times, or Pratt's as he calls them. I do remember one of the young woman that played Sabrina the Teenage Witch on the
Oh yeah, that was the second one.
live-action show was one.
That was sad too. But she taught me about witchcraft, so that's on her.
So Sorbo
taught me about mythology,
Greek mythology,
and Sabrina taught me about witchcraft. They're just not doing it right. They're the ones that made who I am today. They didn't do it right.
Oh, that's...
Okay.
I think
so
one of my
ironic.
favorite facts before we move on is I think it was the movie Fireproof with Kirk Cameron. And one of my favorite facts is there's a character in the movie that's his wife, and there's a scene where he kisses his wife, but that's not his wife in real life. So the scene where they kiss in the movie, they just 100% changed the actress with his actual wife, who is not a body double, like doesn't look like her at all. So if you don't know that and you're watching the movie, it just like changes when he kisses his wife. It's like, oh, who's that woman? And then she's gone in the next scene when they're not kissing. Because he wouldn't do his job like an actor and kiss somebody because it was in the script.
Oh my goodness.
I'm sure they think that's sweet.
And that was Kirk Cameron?
That was Kirk Cameron.
Yeah, so I've seen YouTube videos with him and another guy attempting to make... that's it, Ray Comfort, trying to refute evolution. And once again, it's a straw man argument. So for the benefit... Well, let's assume there's at least one viewer out there. Who don't know what a straw man argument is. Sam, define a straw man argument
It's
for
where
us.
you build up a false opponent that you claim is a viewpoint. You claim false viewpoints that your opponent has that can easily be torn down.
And easily is why they're called a straw
Yeah.
man, because if you're going to fight this guy, it's helpful if he's only made out of straw.
Yeah, so the villains in these movies are atheists who don't even hold positions that true atheists hold. So no wonder why we get so many callers calling us that don't understand what an atheist is and what we think, because they're being fed all these straw man arguments that's what atheists believe.
Alrighty. Well, so today though we put up the question for viewers, 1968, a year of crisis, and we'd like to ask especially viewers who are around to remember 1968, maybe to help us with today's content. It's 50 years ago today that Martin Luther King was murdered or assassinated. And we've got a slide here with the definition of assassinated. Can we get that slide up? And Sam, you want to walk through the definition of assassinated here? It's right here.
A murder, usually a prominent person, by sudden or secret attack, often for political reasons. To injure, destroy unexpectedly or treacherously.
A man's character.
Yep.
So, an assassination is a murder, but it's for political reasons. So Martin Luther King was not murdered because someone wanted to take his money or something like that. He was murdered to stop a movement that he was, a leader of. And I was born in 1959. This was 1968. I was 9 years old when this happened, and I'm pretty sure that that the day this happened, I didn't know who Martin Luther King was, but within a day or two, I did, because my parents were explaining to me the reaction of the nation to his assassination. I'm sure that I had never heard of the city of Memphis prior to that.
Lucky you.
And so it's part of a year at which I begin to become politically aware of the world around me. For people who were watching the news or 50th anniversary things, just last week was the 50th anniversary of the speech that then President Johnson gave, where he talked about the progress, maybe lack thereof, of the war in Vietnam, how it needed his full attention, and how therefore he was choosing not to run for re-election as president. And as a 9-year-old, I actually remember watching that. I'm sure it was because it preempted something I wanted to watch. I remember not understanding it, but I also remember very much that immediately afterwards, there were news analysts that came on and discussed it and kind of explained it, and that they were kind of shocked that he'd chosen not to run. So that would have been the 9-year-old me. Charles, forgive me if I reveal your age. You're a couple years older than me, so you're maybe about 11 years old when this was happening?
Yes. In fact, my birthday is on the 14th, and so I was 10, all but 11 when it happened. I was born in 1957.
All right.
So this is about when we stopped beginning to see the impact of the great new mass media television, where the imagery from the civil rights movement, the anti-war protest, the problems in Vietnam and so forth, was making a more and more major impact in the American conscience. Because before television, the great mass media had been radio.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, it was the printing press. And we had a man by the name of Comstock who got a lot of censorship imposed in the name of common decency.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so what they got out of the new mass media of television was elements and concepts and ideas that wasn't covered by the Comstock Act.
And
the Comstock Act impacted all the soap operas, lots of the books that were published, and so forth. And the term, but how will it play in Peoria?
Yeah.
Is from that area.
So I think you've touched on something real important, and that is that the news coverage of the civil rights actions and the war in Vietnam was really new, and it was really immediate. In January of 1968, the North Vietnamese launched what's called the Tet Offensive, and they made a significant pushback against the positions that the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces held.
Taking advantage of a holiday, right?
I'm not exactly sure how that worked. It may have started in and around our Christmas season, but by January...
I thought that it was that they didn't expect them to attack over a holiday that they...
Yeah. But by January, they had made significant strides, and the U.S. military was clearly seen to not have the situation well in hand. And I think that that's part why Johnson realized that I think if he'd run for re-election, he stood a significant chance of being defeated. And I think he chose, he was forced to choose not to run. And in fact, there was beginning to be credible opposition to him in the primaries in his own party. And for a sitting president to not get his party's own nomination would have been a significant humiliation as well. Now, these are things I didn't know at the time. Charles, by any chance, were you aware of like the primaries, getting ready to start happening by that time, and Johnson's chances?
No, I do remember catching glimpses of Bobby Kennedy and Herbert Humphreys and the rest of them, but I don't distinctly remember what it was all about. I do remember the day Bobby Kennedy was killed, but you couldn't get away from it.
So, for the benefit of viewers, Bobby Kennedy was killed in early June. So it's just about 2 months after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. So let's, I guess, a little bit sort of like a timeline here. What we would call a military defeat in Vietnam in January. End of March, President Johnson says he will not run for and will not accept his party's nomination for president. And that's something like about 4 or 5 days later, Martin Luther King is assassinated. Oh, and something I forget to talk about here. During the last year of his life, Martin Luther King had begun to speak out against our involvement in Vietnam. And that was something, that, there would be many people then who would find, there are going to be plenty of people who found reason to, dislike him and his movement, but this added to some agitation. And so that's in April. In June, Bobby Kennedy is assassinated. And the presidential primaries are ongoing. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, I think, the night that he won the California primary. And I think that had either set him up to actually be the candidate, or at least had given him a very strong hand towards becoming the candidate.
Now, I'm not certain, but do you remember when Kent State shooting happened?
That happened. I think that happened during Nixon's administration, a few years later. Yeah.
But a lot of the problems that surfaced in '68 started coming to a head shortly after that, and so we were divided over many issues as a people. Racism and Vietnam and things of that nature, as well as how complicated the world was getting when more and more nations were getting nuclear weapons. Because shortly before all of this, France walked out of NATO and developed its own nuclear weapons program and shortly produced its own nuclear weapons. Russia was beginning to deploy highly effective long-range ICBMs, and so a lot of people were really worried about just how bad things were getting. And so between all of this, we were in a quite emotional stir as a nation.
Yeah, you brought up many things there that, man, I hadn't even thought to tie the thread in as well. As you were speaking, I'm reminded of how the Apollo project was ongoing. That was actually quite a contrast. It was a thing that a lot of us Americans sort of clung to as, this seems to be something we're doing well. It was entertaining and inspiring. And in fact, in 1968, there's also, it's a fictional thing, but it's having its 50th year anniversary just about now. I've seen these Facebook memes, and that is the movie 2001 came out. Mm-hmm. And 2001 was an astoundingly beautiful movie and inspiring. I didn't actually see it in '68. I think I'd wanted to, but going to the theaters was, I think it could literally be that I just didn't think to ask my parents at the time when it was showing, and then it slipped, and I saw it some years later. Okay, so we're talking about the year in crisis, and I think I want to talk about the presidential campaign a little more. My mother explained to me about the assassination of Martin Luther King, because I wouldn't have known him. I only knew him because of his assassination and the resulting tensions that caused. And then a couple months later, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, same thing. My mother had to explain to me the story about what was going on in the presidential primaries, and what the various candidates, how they differentiated themselves. Do you remember any, let's say, campaign slogans for Bobby Kennedy? Or I think Eugene McCarthy was also running at that time.
Yeah, and well, I think Eugene McCarthy's running mate was Curtis LeMay.
No, LeMay would have been the running mate of the Alabama governor who split the party after the civil rights thing.
Goldwater or the governor? No,
it won't come to me now. He was eventually shot and paralyzed.
Yeah.
George Wallace. LeMay was George Wallace's. That's where I was going to kind of bring us to that eventually. So, but Eugene McCarthy was a very liberal anti-war candidate in the primaries. And I know my mother favored him, and I have older friends who said they favored him as well. But Bobby Kennedy overtook him in the primaries. So you don't remember any of the specifics of those, right?
No, I do not.
Yeah.
Except for a lot of people who were really worried about Curtis LeMay being vice president.
Well, and that's where I was going to go with this. So then, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was signed, and as President Johnson was signing this, he said, this is going to cost the Democratic Party 50 years. Because there were a lot of Southern Democrats who were not merely closet racists, but out and out public racists.
I just cost the party the the South, is what he said.
For 50 years. He used the word 50 years as well. And the result was that a lot of Southern Democrats left the party, and they were courted by George Wallace. George Wallace ran a campaign, and it might have been something like, segregation now, segregation forever. And Curtis LeMay was his vice presidential candidate. And Curtis LeMay was, so for the viewers who don't know, Curtis LeMay was a general during World War II. He was kind of famous as the general who was organizing the Pacific Campaign for the Army Air Corps that resulted in the use of nuclear weapons in Japan that ended World War II. And he...
Not to mention
Go on.
The fact that he was also the first commander of the Strategic Air Command.
Yes.
He was in charge of all our nuclear weapons capabilities for the Air Force.
And he spoke about these systems as if he was really eager to use them. He was itching for a nuclear war. And he was George Wallace's running mate. So the result in 1968 was a three-party race. George Wallace didn't delude himself into thinking he could win, but he thought he could influence votes enough and get enough electoral votes that he could force the election into the House of Representatives, that neither the Republican nor the Democrat would have a majority, and that then he could use that as bargaining power to roll back civil rights gains from the 1964 bill. So this is yet what's happening in this environment of 1968. All right, so yeah, Charles, thank you for bringing up Curtis LeMay. That let us talk about George Wallace. Yeah.
Yeah, things were going on politics-wise. I do know quite recently we had that guy running for Senator State, Judge Roy Moore, got a pretty good stomping in his own home state because a significant number of African Americans voted for the very first time in their lives.
Uh-huh.
They suddenly realized that, yeah, we can have an impact. And one of the things I like about Martin Luther King is that it took a long time, but that part of his dream is coming true.
As we were reviewing this, and I was reading these things and reliving them. I lived through these things and was becoming politically aware. The candidacy of George Wallace was kind of scary. I understood politics enough of what was going on in 1968 to recognize that he was preaching an idea that my parents had taught me was one of great evil.
Well, I can go one better. My father was in the Navy, and I lived in many places. One of them was in Knoxville, Maryland, and we were so close to Washington, D.C., we were effectively speaking ground zero for the nuclear strikes.
Uh-huh.
And so I grew up with awareness that if it all went to pot, everything around me would become radioactive rubble.
You could probably say the same thing about Knoxville, though, with Oak Ridge being right there.
We're downwind of it, yeah. Where we are at our studio here would likely have had the same kind of target proximity in the late 1960s.
Yeah, but when when you're the son of the Navy, you overhear it from friends, from your dad's friends, from your mother and her friends, because the U.S. Navy had just deployed the Polaris missile submarines.
All right.
So we had first-hand understanding of what was going on in the nuclear weapons capabilities. And more importantly, the delivery capabilities. The Russians had deployed very large rockets, but they weren't very accurate. They had a lot of throwaway, but they wouldn't always get very, very near the intended target, so they put on very, very powerful nuclear weapons.
There was another term I think I learned right around this time as well. MIRV. Sam, do you have any idea what?
Independent reentry vehicle.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sam, any idea what that means? Multiple reentry vehicles. The Russians had missiles that would launch multiple nuclear warheads, and because they weren't real accurate, they would just spread out so that, you know, some of them are going to be close to the target. I mean, it's kind of a ghastly concept. It was, you know, like the cluster bomb concept
with nukes
for nuclear weapons. Yeah.
And so it was hard for me to get away from, because where I usually lived was excuse me, on or near ground zero, primary target. And I still remember the sirens
Oh, yeah.
that they would run. And
So for us
I know.
in Minnesota, I think it was the first Wednesday of every month at 1 o'clock, they would exercise the air raid sirens. And even though I lived in a rural part, let's call it a rural suburb of St. Paul, we would hear the sirens. And, you know, it was a regular part of growing up that the air raid siren systems were being tested. So, Sam, have you ever, do they have air raid sirens exercises around here?
Not in Knoxville.
Yeah. All right. TriCaster operator Rev, have you ever heard air raid siren drills in a city like Knoxville?
Only in the Air Force, not Knoxville.
Yeah, so you've been, your Air Force, you've been on an Air Force base and you've maybe heard them there?
Right, but tests, but not in Knoxville.
Yeah. So that was what life was like in the late 60s, is that every month we were reminded that there was a system in place where you maybe had to go and hide. I lived in a wooden house. There was no place to hide. You know, I guess we could have gone to the basement.
Yeah, like that's gonna be.
When I was living in Maryland, we didn't even have a basement. We had a crawl space with a furnace in it.
Would there have been anything like neighborhood fallout shelters for you?
No.
No. Okay.
Closest we could come would have been the basements of some of the local stores.
All right.
But one of the things that I did want to bring up during this show is an interesting set of books by a man. Hold on one second.
All right. And once you find that, we'll talk about it. Then we're going to do our mid-program break here soon. Should we do our mid-program break while you look, Charles?
Go ahead.
All righty. Sam, let's jump in here. It's probably the second page from the back. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions.
We have moved. This is our new regular time every Wednesday from 6:30 to 7:30 Eastern Time on Knoxville Community Access Station 6, 12, 19, or 136 or 196, depending on your local cable network. Tell your out-of-town friends to see us streaming online at ctvknox.org.
Today's show is live, April 4th, 2018. And you can call the number on our screen and speak with us while we take a short break. Please watch these informative videos. And Rev, can we run that?
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
And we're back. The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets one or more times a week. We have eating meetups for fun, food, drink, and conversation. You can find us online at knoxvilleatheist.org. The purpose of the Atheist Society of Knoxville is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons in East Tennessee. Next Tuesday's meeting is at 5:30. At, once again, the Black Horse Pub and Brewery, 4429 Kingston Pike in the Western Plaza Shopping Center.
The second Saturday in April is the RAT Adopt a Highway event. It is from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Location, the Burger King on Schaefer Road off Lovell exit. Members participating are required to wear sturdy gloves and shoes and bring a picker-upper if you don't have one. Meet at the Burger King at Lovell. All volunteers must watch the video before working on the road.
And if the weather's inclement, I guess we do the pickup the following week on the, what says on the 20th. I bet that's wrong. I bet it's the 14th. Well, watch our website. The Rationalists of East Tennessee Skeptics Book Club meets the second Sunday of the month. The book for April 11th is Unapologetic: Why Philosophy of Religion Must End by John Loftus. Book club is from 2 to 4 p.m. and the location is Books A Million, 8513 Kingston Pike, Knoxville. You need not have read the book to attend, but of course it helps.
The RET has a meeting on the third Sunday in April. It is going to feature a DVD presentation from the Skeptics Society, a distinguished lecture series by Dr. Chris Impley, Humble Before the Void, Western Science Meet Tibetan Buddhism. Surprises, delights, and unbridled myth are not commonly encouraged in the science classroom, but in the foothills of the Himalayas, a program to teach cosmology to Buddhist monks by the University of Arizona astronomer Chris Impley. They were daily occurrences. Working with a unique audience spurred new ways of thinking about the universe and the art of teaching. This talk takes listeners on an adventure at the nexus of science, religion, philosophy, and culture. Dr. Impey studies quasars and distant galaxies and is the author of How It Began and How It Ends in the Living Cosmos and has won 11 teaching awards.
On April 29th, the annual Rationalists of East Tennessee public speaker will be Tennessee's most dangerous woman. Gail Jordan, Director of Recovering from Religion, will speak on her recent candidacy for Tennessee State Senate in District 14's special election. I think that's over in Central Tennessee. It was held this past March 13th. She didn't win, no surprise there. And this will actually be her first presentation on the topic, so she's outlining the content even as we speak, no doubt. Gail was open about her atheism during the campaign. Gail was branded Tennessee's most dangerous woman by the Lieutenant Governor of Tennessee, Randy McNally.
This is our state. That's how crazy we are.
Yep. The date, once again, is April 29. The time is 2 p.m., and it will be in the Goins Auditorium at the Pellissippi State Technical Community College, Hardin Valley campus. That's the one off of the Pellissippi Highway and the Hardin Valley cross street. See rationalist.org for program, meeting times, and locations, and a list of future books. Okay, well, that kind of covers our mid-program break. We want to encourage viewers, give us a call here. If you remember the year in crisis of 1968, and you can help Charles and me explain it to the youngsters here in the studio, Sam and Rev, we'd appreciate it. So we've talked about a lot about the candidates and the political primaries here. So later on, in the summer and fall of '68, was the Democratic National Convention, and that was it's hard to describe it. Surprisingly violent as well. Charles, what do you remember about that?
I remember commentary on news about the rioting. I couldn't make being 11-year-old heads or tails over what everybody was squabbling about at that time, but that it did in fact happen, and this was in Chicago, as I learned later, and that it was almost breaking the Democratic Party into splintered bits because of the animosity that was generated.
Yeah,
And so it was, especially the backlash from coming from the police and so forth, that was highly heavy-handed, is the way to put it.
Yes. So the Democratic Party held the office of the presidency. The president was a Democrat, but he wasn't running again. And at the convention, they were fighting it out. Within the party, there was a strong anti-war movement. The Democratic Party itself was very divided about the war. The Republicans were not divided about it. They're very much the strong defense. They weren't quite as crazy as the Curtis LeMay people, but they had no such division over the war. So my memory of the convention is just a little bit firmer, and that's because after much conflict, the candidate chosen was Hubert Humphrey. Now, Hubert Humphrey he was the vice president at the time. That's part of why he was opposed, because he was too close to the administration that was unpopular with so many Democrats. But he was from Minnesota, so he was our hometown boy. And in our household, Mother was okay with him. Mother had supported Eugene McCarthy. She told me about that, and that he was the stronger anti-war candidate. But she was ready to support Hubert Humphrey. So, do you remember when maybe you learned about who was chosen by the Democrats, Charles?
Yes, that was when the general election itself got underway.
I mean by that is that the result of the primary or of the convention was to choose Hubert Humphrey, and then the sloganing started. That's the point. Okay.
I learned that occasions because basically I had gone to bed.
All right.
Because I had to get up early the next morning to go to school.
Yeah.
And I do remember it was very bitter struggle with a lot of what we now call fake news reporting about each side, from each side, and how Humphreys lost his temper at one heckler, and that didn't go down well with the general population. But
And I assume the heckler was an anti-war heckler?
no, he was a pro-war heckler.
He was, huh? Okay. I'll confess I don't remember that.
That didn't go down well. And or was it Wallace that got beaten by that?
Well,
Anyway,
I'm not sure where Wallace was on
it
that.
was all the squabbling going on within each party. There was still a strong segment that supported the Curtis LeMay view of war, thinking the unthinkable, winning the unwinnable, as one pundit put it, and which is basically what it'd be like to try to have a limited nuclear war if push comes to shove, which I find very interesting concept.
So when
Another factor was how that if we were the other side was a bunch of appeasements and let's all do the belly up to the commies and
yeah, I remember those kind of criticisms. So, do you remember any slogans during the election? I think you were talking about, you went back to school and you started hearing about it.
no, I don't. It's simply too far back for my memory.
Let me try one on you. So I rode a bus to school, and I remember kids singing, and within our bus we had supporters of both parties. I mean, goodness, we're 9 years old, but we were elementary age. So there were people who sang, "Humphrey, Humphrey, he's our man. If he can't do it, nobody can."
Okay.
I made Sam laugh here. Does that sound familiar to you, Charles? "Humphrey, Humphrey, he's our man. If he can't do it, nobody can."
No,
Oh, all right.
it doesn't.
I
And I was living I was living with Navy people and so forth, so a lot of them tended to not want to step into
politics.
the
Yeah.
the political process itself.
So, but the politicians did of course try to get as much publicity as possible, and there were TV shows that became more and more political. In particular, during 1968, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was on the air, and they didn't pull punches to be critical of then President Johnson. And it may have been in late '67. They had Pete Seeger on, and Pete Seeger sang a song that ostensibly sounded like it was set in World War II, but the title of it was something like "Waist Deep in the Big Muddy and the Big Fool Says to Press On."
Yeah.
And is very clearly aimed at President Johnson.
Another show I remember was Laughing.
I was going there too. What do you remember about Laughing? Actually, for the benefit of our younger people in the studio, what's Laughing? Sam, do you know what Laughing is?
A skit show?
Laughing was one of the first great comedy sketch
Pre-Saturday
shows
Night Live
where
something?
They didn't have it wasn't like a Father Knows Best or a situation comedy. It was just comedy routines and
Yeah, so pre-Saturday Night Live.
routines and so forth. and this was prime time.
Oh, okay.
And
what emphasized it or set it apart is that the segments were quite short, so they would be rapidly switching subjects. And they might a camera might just switch to one of their personalities who would just utter a single line. And one of the most common lines, I think that from their very first show, they set this sort of theme. It was this sort of catchphrase: "Sock it to me."
Sock it to me, baby.
Sock it to me, or sock it to me, baby. So were you
another
remembering?
one was,
Go on,
the
Charles.
Flying Fickle Fate Award.
Flying Fickled Finger Fate Award. This was not an award you really wanted to win. It was, so you mentioned Laugh-In, and I was wondering, do you remember the tie-in to the election? There's one candidate who appeared on it. It was not the Democrat. It was the stuffy Republican.
It was Ricky Dickey, Richard Nixon.
It was Richard Nixon. And
Because I distinctly remember hearing him say, "Sock it to me, baby," in his voice.
and it was so out of character for
Yeah, I'm sure it
the
really got him
Republican.
votes.
Well, what struck me, or in hindsight, I think it's sort of brave of him, because he wasn't going into, let's call it the friendly zone there. But there he was on Ron Martin's Laugh-In, this primetime comedy hour, and it would have been, a month or so before the election went down. He was there. So the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, though, they were doing anti-war things that they certainly eroded Johnson's popularity, and they also were doing things that had never been done before. There was this video they had that was like a 3-minute history of the United States of America, and it was just still images to some fast-paced music, and the images, they didn't whitewash American history. So there would have been, of course, images of famous presidents of the past, Washington and so on, but then of battles. And there would have been pictures from the Civil War. I'm pretty sure I remember pictures from the Civil War that were pretty ugly looking.
They also have several pictures of engravings and drawings of the slavery markets and the
Yeah.
Carolinas and so forth. And I think that's what's finally one of the reasons why they got their plug pulled on their TVs. Is that the sponsors and so forth were all worried that they would lose viewership, and that the sponsors would pull out.
Yeah. But it was a very powerful video. So Charles, it sounds like you remember that video as well.
Yes.
It was sort of shockingly different. I'd never seen anything like that. The pace was so fast and different.
What was it called?
It was like a pictorial history of America or the United States. You can find it if you go to one of those online video things and search for Smothers Brothers. It probably was shown in something like their December 1967 show, because it happened later. The last slide was a picture that said, throughout it, there were all of the presidents were listed sequentially. I think all of them. And right at the end, there was a slide that said Hubert Humphrey, ? Richard Nixon, because that was the choice for Americans. And that's how the slideshow ended.
Yeah. That
And then-
leads me into the books I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. Lies my teacher told me, and the sundown downlands. For instance, when was the first European settlement in what is now the United States?
I give up. Charles, what is it?
The Spanish would be a around 1526, when 500 Spaniards and approximately 100 black slaves founded a town in what is now present-day South Carolina, and this was significantly before the first English settlement. And note that we don't mention that anywhere in our history books.
Yeah.
Okay?
All righty.
Because our history is very English-orientated and so forth. And another aspect is, what was the first European to engage in slavery in what is now commonly referred to as the New World?
I give up. Help us with that, Charles.
Christopher Columbus.
Okay, all right. I should have known that. I should have seen that because he captured. Oh goodness, they landed on
Puerto Rico,
yeah.
what is now known as Puerto Rico.
And I think they called it Hispaniola at the time, right? I think
Yeah.
they called it that.
He claimed it for the Catholic crown.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that you and I are talking about 1968 and Martin Luther King and so forth, are may not be in a lot of history texts and so forth because of political pressure, because of budget restraints, and religious feelings and so forth, that they try to whitewash the history.
Oh yes, it's been very selected. Well, we're getting real long time here, and I want to mention the thing that happened at the end of the year, and I very, very, very much remember this, and that is in December of 1968, Apollo 8 was launched to the moon. 3 astronauts traveled to the moon and circled it. They were there in orbit on Christmas Eve. They read a little bit from Genesis. It was quite dramatic. And
We got the best photograph ever
they sent
of
back.
the planet Earth.
Yep, they sent back a photograph that changed the world for the better.
Was it round?
Yes,
Okay.
it's round, but not really round. Is that they made a film as they orbited around the moon. The Earth came up over the horizon, and aside from the 3 people who were behind the camera, so to speak, everyone who had ever lived or was alive was on that unexpectedly, incredibly beautiful blue and white marble. And although they went to explore the moon, they discovered the Earth. And the Apollo 11 astronauts said that one of the most moving things ever said to them is that they saved 1968. It was a year that seemed, one ghastly thing after another. And at the end, we saw this beautiful planet, and we finished it with a kind of hope that was, I still find it as precious. Charles, we have to start wrapping up. Thank you for helping me reminisce on this. So viewers, it's get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
You can give us feedback by email at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com or our Facebook group, Knoxville Freethought Forum.
Your friends can see the show Wednesday evenings from 6:30 to 7:30 Eastern Time. Anywhere the internet reaches, ctvknox.org. Nuns, those who identify with no religion, are the fastest growing religious group in America right here in East Tennessee. If you don't believe in God,
You are not alone.